Hello, this is Reverend Dr. Anthusa Helaner, owner, developer, and founder of Sollite. Sollite's mission is about healing and conscious awakening. I have private sessions that I offer and also integrative medicine programs that I teach that are geared towards bridging the gap between medicine and spirituality. Now, it's also targeted for the audience of healthcare professionals, but also anybody else that's interested in wellness, healing, and awakening and evolving to a higher state of consciousness, either for themselves or to help their loved ones or friends to have these experiences as well. So today's topic is about the illusion of separation. It is a challenging topic to discuss because, as well as any spiritual teaching, subjects like this that are paradoxical in nature and also that can have preconditioned ideas of conceptions and interpretations of meanings of this subject can create challenges to convey these deeper teachings that really are meant to have an experience instead of something that is grasped onto by the mind, because the mind truly cannot understand these concepts or ideas or awakening process. So let's start with the illusion of separation. One of the main missions of Sollite was to heal the illusion of separation, because I found it to be the core underlying cause of illness of all of humanity, which is individually and globally a tragic accident and can affect us globally and individually. So the ultimate cure or resolution to this subject, or what I call illness, is to remember the truth of who you really are. A divine spiritual being having a human experience. Now, when you think about separation or duality, you can understand that all of humanity has this inner conflict, whether it is very pronounced within you or whether it's just an underlying soft voice. It can cause confusion and lack of guidance and just an inner knowing of you just don't feel quite right being in conflict. Now, because I've got my doctorate in spiritual counseling, I did my dissertation on comparative religions, but on the metaphysical versions of these religions. So in choosing the one portion of Sufism, they call this inner war or this inner conflict that we all have within us the mujahada. It is the ultimate experience of duality, which distracts us from being in oneness and unity. Now, if you think about it also, when you're in peace or you have a wonderful meditation, or if you're enjoying nature and you're having a wonderful contemplative experience with nature, you really aren't experiencing any conflict because you're having this moment of inner stillness and inner peace. And when we're in that place of stillness and peace, there is no war, there is no conflict. So one of the areas of being able to rise above or to heal this illusion of separation is through meditation, contemplation, prayer, and another level of working and healing with this area on a physical level is through craniosacral therapy and the adjustments of the cranial sutures and cranial bones, especially targeted towards the frontal bone, your forehead, and the parietal bones, which is paired bones, which is basically the top of the head, like a halo or a crown, or your crown chakra has paired bones like wearing a little hat. Now I'm going to talk about the two versions of separation in two different ways. One in a physical level and one in a more spiritual or conscious awakening means of expression. First, I'm going to start with the physical. In the 1950s, Dr. Hans Sollite, an endocrinologist and scientific researcher, developed what he called the stress response model. He was also up for the Nobel Prize for developing this stress response model, which we actually still use today. He noted that in the center of the head, in the brain, right, straight through and straight through, but it's in the middle, straight through in the middle, straight through in the top. Some of you may refer to this place as your pineal gland or your third eye in yoga, in yogic terms, and just a place of resonance of light that's held within the center of the brain. In cranial sacral therapy, it's known as the cranial fourth ventricle. So we're looking at actually two specific areas there, which Dr. Hans Sollite also mentioned and targeted in the brain, known as the amygdala and the hippocampus. Now, the amygdala holds fear and responds to fear and triggers fear. It triggers the autonomic nervous system to go into a severe response. We know of this as the fight, flight, or freeze method in the autonomic nervous system. It's an instinctual, primal area of the brain that we all, mammals, all of us have, and so we notice it in animals. For example, like if you have a cat or you notice cats, when they get scared, they really scamper, their eyes get wide open, their hair may stand on, their fur may stand up on their skin, or they just scamper away. So like a deer in the headlights, you can go into any modalities of freeze, run away, which is flight, and also the fight. You might want to, one of the animals might want to fight against whatever is causing them to have this instinctual response. And since we are mammals as human beings, we also have this primal instinctual response within us. So the hippocampus, the other area of the brain, is the place where we hold all our memories, our belief systems, our conditioning that happens throughout our lifetime since we're born. We're conditioned to think one way, to believe in one way, to act in one manner, to have morals and values in some sort of a way. So those two areas, the amygdala and the hippocampus, are the main focal points that we're looking at. Also, I want to mention the hippocampus holds all our traumatic experiences. Any trauma that we might have had through our lifetime that may have happened on a physical, a mental, a spiritual, an emotional level. And when it gets to a higher elevation that it's constant, it becomes chronic, and then it becomes post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a little bit more difficult to heal and challenging to work through. So these are important areas that Dr. Hans Selye mentioned. I wanted to let you know that he actually labeled it as the OAA, which is Orientation Association Area in this midbrain area that we're talking about. Now, he quoted that in this OAA area, that it actually created a sense of other rather than self, meaning it creates separation. We know ourself, but then we also see the other. And that's where we're looking at to work on either rising above through a witnessing state, or ultimately spiritually healing through what I call merging or conjoining the opposites. Now, I want to just read a bit, a comment of the most primal level that this instinctual way can be used as an example for you to understand. So the most primal level, in the most instinctual way, encountering the opposites, was the extreme example of disconnect in the expression of what was worded on the cross and said by Jesus himself. Lord, Father, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me? Now that is a very extreme response that was occurring at the end of a physical reaction where he was about to die, that he had the experience of extreme opposites and said these words to his Father. So I want to mention here, again, that came from a very primordial, instinctual place within his brain on a physical level. But it was also the experience of life and what was happening at that time. I mentioned this to you because in past recordings I have spoken about life. In the healing process, life is your medicine. In the conscious awakening area, life is your conscious awakening process. And now again, in the illusion of separation and working with this area, life is the play of opposites. So you can see a thread that I'm talking about, how our own human life experience is really such an important, valuable experience we are having here to help us evolve and heal in many ways. Now, I want to ask you this question. What if I told you there is no duality? And if I told you that you can use separation as a tool? Now, this may sound paradoxical at this moment in time, but you can use separation to actually get you out of separation, maybe into what we call unity consciousness. Now I'm going to give you two examples of what I just spoke about. Think about a coin. Let's just use a quarter. If you look at one side of the coin, it has a symbol of the head on it. You turn the coin around, you look at the opposite side of the same coin, and you see the tail of the coin. So it's the same energy, it's one coin, it's one quarter, but it has two opposite realities, two opposite sides, a head and a tail. Now let's have a personal experience about this. You are now, those of you watching me, are looking at me and listening. So you're experiencing somewhat, resonating with having a connection with me. So I want you to, if you want to experience this, turn around and don't face me. Or you can just imagine that you turned around and you're not facing me. You can still hear me, and you have a sense that I'm somewhere, but you're not sure where. And you've lost one of your primary senses, your sense of sight. So in one reality, you're having a sense of separation or disconnect from me because you're not seeing me. So now I'm going to ask you to both internally pivot, or physically, those of you that actually turned around, turn back around and pivot and face me. Now you have this sense, a greater sense, that you're connected because you're using one of your 5 primary senses of visual ability. So that's just one level experience of feeling disconnected, separated, and then returning by having an internal or external pivot and feeling connected again, feeling in unity and oneness somewhat again. I hope that was a bit helpful, those 2 examples. Now ultimately, we want to merge and conjoin these opposites. We want to see them both simultaneously at the same time. Because as you just experienced, if you turned around and disconnected a bit, a new thing is born out of that third thing. So when you're conjoining or merging the 2 opposites, there is a third energy that is created that is unique and different to experience, that is different and separate from opposites. So let me now just summarize a bit what we've just talked about. First is 2 definitions, 2 separations of separation, excuse me. One is called essential separation. And that was more the example of Jesus's last words as he was making transition out of his body on the cross, where he was actually experiencing and being, perceiving and causing himself or oneself to feel totally isolated and unconnected. Versus what we talk about as relative separation, which is an example of the second version where I had you turn around a bit. Relative separation is that everything shares the same fundamental nature, even while it appears to be separate from the other. Now, another example of relative separation would be when you just think of humanity as a whole. You're walking around, you see human beings, we all look like human beings somewhat. But we also have some differences that are individual. We may be male or female, maybe various colors, different ethnic backgrounds, may be short or tall, wide or skinny. So you can see that there's individual differences, but fundamentally we're the same. We're experiencing being a human being, but separate in different ways of viewing perspectives. So I just wanted to differentiate between essential, which is when you really totally feel disconnected from everything. There's nothing in common, nothing fundamental that is running through that thread, versus the relative separation, where everything is pretty much the same, but there are differences within that sameness. One of the important keys to conjoining opposites is to hold them in conscious experience simultaneously. Now you ask me, how do we do this? By holding any pair of opposites within your awareness simultaneously without resistance. Now, of course, as soon as you start to attempt to try to hold opposite ways of thinking or opposite experiences, there is naturally going to be a resistance that arises, because it's the human mind that wants to understand. It wants to grasp onto something. It wants to give meaning to something. It wants to say that, oh, I found the answer. So it pulls it in and grabs onto it. And then if it's something that it doesn't want to experience, it then automatically wants to push it away. Oh, that's not happening. I don't want to feel angry. I don't want to feel sad. It's not happening. I'm going to change what I'm doing and put it in the background and not feel that. So that is what I mean by the resistance. So I want to just say that resistance is something you do want to look into with honest self-inquiry at some point in time, but not when you're working on experiencing holding opposites simultaneously. That's a whole nother topic and subject to experience. So how long will this take to hold opposites until you feel like they're merged or in unity or conjoined together and there's no conflict? Well, I can't answer that. Everybody's going to be individual, and it will take as long as it takes. However, it's worth the practice, because just feeling and experiencing holding opposites simultaneously actually brings you again into a deeper, greater state of awareness, but it also creates a third energy that can take you into other experiences of unity or other evolutionary experiences of consciousness. So it's worth doing the practice. And of course, doing this practice is always better done or experienced through meditation or in a contemplative state, maybe when you're out in nature and you're enjoying yourself. And, it's not something you really want to try to do when you're working or actually having a conflict with another individual in a relationship. But ultimately, you can experience that too as you practice it. You can take it into your everyday life. So, continuing about that, when we conjoin these two opposites, like I said, something greater than either part is realized. Now again, how do you do this is what you might ask. And I used to teach this, and I still do. You do this by being a witness or coming from a witness state. But I have found, eventually at some point in time, the identity of being the witness is woken up from, and non-duality, unity, is the result. So I used to teach this, and again I still do, in a triangular format. So at the base of the triangle, you have your opposites. You have white, black, day, night, male, female, sun, moon. And then in witnessing, to rise above, feeling so conflicted by going back and forth, I would take you to the top of the triangle here, where you would be the observer or the witness, and you would just see what was going on down here without actually interacting. So you would be part of the world or part of the experience, but not of it, not actually grossly involved with what was going on. So yes, that's true, and that's the basis where we're going to start. But eventually, in spiritual evolution and conscious awakening, I want to take you beyond this witness state of unity, because even unity has its limitations and perspectives and understanding. So that's a whole nother topic of another session. I actually teach a whole month in the integrative medicine program called Awareness in the Brain, and we go into depth about this topic of separation. And I just want to encourage you that together we will get there wherever there is, if you just keep walking and experiencing your own process of evolution. So to finalize about spiritual teachings and awakening process, we all like spiritual teachings to be as simple and straightforward as possible. But the deeper we go, the more paradoxical things become, as well as conditioned ways of interpreting and giving meaning to what is said and to what the experience you are having. So I always talk about don't give meaning to anything. So we'll go into that even more, but this is where we want to start looking at when we are interpreting what we're experiencing through collective consciousness, words, or conditioning, or us interpreting and giving meaning, oh, this is what's going on, then that actually convolutes the experience of what we're working to achieve. Remember, each person has a unique individual experience of their awakening process, and yet the same, which adds more to the mix of the paradox and communicating on the subject. As well as concepts like conscious, unconscious, subconscious, collective conscious, and archetypes are all words to express an experience. But we are not engaging in metaphysics here. Metaphysical speculation is when we equate these meanings with absolute reality, when we possibly can mistake our means of expression with absolute reality. So you could see how things can get convoluted or confused, again, by meanings and interpretation. None of what I say or teach is absolute truth, because the absolute truth of anything lies outside of all our means of communication. Our mind cannot understand enlightenment, unity, raising our consciousness to higher levels of evolution. Our mind is just not set up to understand those things. So there's a flaw with words and communication and expression in spiritual teachings. Admittedly, when dealing with highly paradoxical matters, it poses a great challenge to both the teacher and the student alike. So I hope this topic has been good for you today, stimulated some of your thought processes and your intuitive feeling, emotions, whatever resonates with you, that's great. And what, if I've said anything that does not resonate, then just throw it away or keep it in a back burner and ponder it for a while. Because I've experienced in life through all of my teachers that they might have said something to me and right away I said, oh, that doesn't make sense, that's not for me. But then, you know, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, I go, aha, now I understand what that person was talking about. So I leave that discernment, discretion up to you. If you want to know more about Sollite, about my private sessions, integrative medicine programs that I offer, log on to www.sollite.com. That's SOLLITE.com. I thank you for spending the time to listen and view this video today. And I wish you all the peace, blessings, and abundance and joy that you can experience in your life. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.